acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation on whose land we are gathered today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And we are very happy to welcome Nishan Chandelier, who is the regional coordinator of Access Australia and New Zealand. And the plan for today is as follows. Nishant will first give us a presentation for 30 minutes on European funding opportunities. This will be followed by Q&A for approximately 15 minutes, but it can continue a bit. The first part, the presentation part, will be recorded and the Q&A will not be recorded. So that is only available for people who are attending live. And yeah, so that's all, and the stage is yours, Nishant.
Thank you, Sumanti. Yes, thank you very much for inviting. And what I'll quickly do is maybe start sharing my screen and then I could proceed with my presentation. So I believe you should be able to see my screen right now. Yeah, just to give you a breakdown of how we will proceed today, I've structured it into 3 parts. So EU Framework Program for Research and Innovation would be the background part, which we need to understand before moving into what European funding are there for researchers in Australia. And then lastly, I'll just briefly touch upon what Access Australia and New Zealand does and what we do exactly in Australia and New Zealand. So let's start with the first thing here, the EU Framework Program Horizon 2020. The reason that I mentioned Horizon 2020 is you might hear this a lot. It was the previous Horizon program, and it was for a period of 2014 till 2020. You do not have to worry much about what is on the right-hand side. It's just that if you keep on hearing Horizon 2020 in the near future as well, keep in mind that it was the previous EU framework program, because there are projects that have been funded under Horizon 2020, which will run till 23 or even 24. So the only 2 things that I want you to focus on is the ones that are being highlighted. So European Research Council and Marie Sklodowska-Curie. Now let's start our actual presentation. So the current EU framework program is called Horizon Europe, and it has a budget of around 95.5 billion euros for a period of 7 years. So starting 2021 and will end on 2027. Of course, you need to understand that there are 3 pillars, pillar 1, pillar 2, and pillar 3. But as individual researchers, you should be more concerned about pillar 1 and more specifically on European Research Council and Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions. And these will be our main focus today. There are other opportunities as well in pillar 2, but we will have a look at it in slight detail later on. One thing that I want to emphasize before we move on to the crux of my presentation is under Horizon Europe, there was this new incentive or a key novelty that the European Commission wanted to strengthen international cooperation. And how could this be done? By extending association possibilities. So when we organized the Horizon Europe launch in Australia and New Zealand, I don't know how many of you could actually join us in that event. We had Director Russo, who is the International Cooperation Director at the European Commission. She actually encouraged Australia and New Zealand to become associated to Horizon Europe. How does that play a role? A lot of things that are on pillar 1 are open for researchers of any nationality. However, majority of what is open for researchers in pillar 2 is not automatically eligible for funding when it comes to developed countries like Australia and New Zealand. And because of this, and because a lot of researchers actually showed interest from New Zealand and they wrote to their department, New Zealand actually signed a letter of intent requesting for association to Horizon Europe in December of 2021. The negotiations are working quite well with them, and we expect New Zealand to be associated to Horizon Europe. I wish I could have said the same thing about Australia, but we are keeping our fingers crossed in terms of how the negotiations will move forward in terms of Australia getting associated. With that being said, now let's keep into consideration that Australia is still a 3rd country. And with that being said, how can you as researchers from Australia start availing European funding? So there are automatically 2 things that we will discuss, Marie Sklodowska-Curie and ERC. So Marie Curie is for supporting mobility training and career development of researchers. what we need to understand is there is a 3I approach. What does 3I mean? It's international, intersectoral, and interdisciplinary. So this is what forms the crust. A lot of the things that we discuss on Marie Curie is bottom up. So you can actually decide on what you want to research. There is something for researchers at all stages of their career, and we'll have a look at that in the next slides. But a few important figures that I wanted to highlight was on how the numbers stacked in terms of Horizon 2020. Horizon Europe, we still do not have significant numbers to show, but Horizon 2020, almost 65,000 researchers, including 25,000 PhD candidates were funded under MSCA. Interestingly, 50% of all third country participation in Horizon 2020 was in Marie Sklodowska-Curie, and 37% of researchers were from outside EU, which is quite a good number if you look at how there are third countries and how the European funding is being accessible. So of course, 6.2 billion euros was what was under Horizon 2020. This has slightly increased now to 6.6 billion euros under Horizon Europe. More than 1,000 doctoral programs were being run under Marie Sklodowska-Curie. More than 4,500 companies were supported, and approximately 42% of the researchers that were funded were female. Of course, we are trying to improve this number to have more parity. In terms of what is there in Marie Sklodowska-Curie under Horizon Europe. So this is what we will discuss today. The doctoral network are for training PhD candidates, postdoctoral fellowship automatically for postdoctoral researchers. Staff exchanges are for any type of research related staff and their mobility. And last one is co-fund. Although co-fund is not very relevant to you, but you'll realize later on why I'm going to discuss co-fund with you. Now let's start with the doctoral network. What you need to understand is, first and foremost, I'll take you to the last part, which says who applies to MSCA doctoral network. So these are consortium of universities. So as an individual researcher, you are not going to apply to MSCA doctoral network. What is your interest? Why am I presenting this to you? Is because if you look at the target group, doctoral candidates are the target group, which means that, example, so a consortium of universities come together, they put forward their proposal for doctoral network, they are funded by the European Commission. That is when these networks release vacancies, and these are doctoral vacancies. And this is what, as researchers, you will apply to. There are two types of industrial doctorates. There are two types of doctorates, industrial and joint doctorate. Of course, if you are looking at it from individual researcher point of view, these are quite highly prestigious. And one thing that you need to keep in mind is all the vacancies that come out of doctoral network have to be posted on Euraxis website. So there are quite a lot of vacancies on our website, which you will see later on. Now, let's move on to postdoctoral fellowship. And this is something that as an individual researcher, you will apply yourself. And this will be done in collaboration with a host institution. So these are mono-beneficiary action to support postdoctoral researchers. What does that mean? So as a researcher from Australia, you will get in touch with a host institution in Europe or an associated country, and you will apply together for the postdoctoral fellowship. So there are two types of fellowships. One is European fellowship, which is for researchers of any nationality who will be moving to Europe. And then there is global fellowship, which is for European nationals coming to Australia for that matter, for example. And the results of postdoctoral fellowship were announced very recently, a week ago, actually, and there were 17 Australians who received European fellowship, and there were 9 Europeans who received global fellowship to come to Australia. So this is more like a brain circulation that we are seeing. There are two things that you need to keep in mind when you are applying for postdoctoral fellowship. There is something called mobility rules. So you cannot or you should not have stayed more than 12 months in the last 3 years in the country that you are planning to go. So for example, if you want to work with a host institution in Germany, in the last 3 years, you should not have spent more than 12 months in Germany. If you have, you cannot choose that host institution in that particular country, right? Then a novelty under Horizon Europe was while applying at the call deadline, you should be having a PhD degree. If not, you will not be eligible to apply for postdoctoral fellowship. And the last part is up to 8 years of research experience after PhD at the call deadline. Of course, this does not include if you have taken career breaks or if you have worked outside research or worked outside Europe in case of reintegration. What does the duration in terms of postdoctoral fellowship look like? So European fellowship is for 12 to 24 months. Global fellowship has 2 phases. So the European fellows will come to Australia, for example, for 12 to 24 months and then have to go back as a mandatory return phase in Europe. You can always have secondments, and these can be for a duration of up to 6 months in academic or non-academic organizations. I have to mention that these postdoctoral fellowship are very prestigious as well. It's very possible that a lot of you might receive more than 85% of the score, but yet not receive funding because there are a limited number of seats. Once that happens, you will be awarded Seal of Excellence. This is a kind of a certification that the European Commission provides, saying that your proposal was excellent, but due to lack of funding, you are not funded. How is it useful? There are almost 12 member states that recognize Seal of Excellence already. More are following the suit in terms of seeing your CV more favorably when you include your Seal of Excellence in the CV itself. Now, of course, we understand that there will be quite a lot of interest again on postdoctoral fellowship. So we are going to organize an introductory webinar on 5th of May and a more detailed practical session on application advice on how to write a successful application on 2nd of June. We did something similar last year, and I put the links to those 2 webinars. These are on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to go and check them out if you feel this is something that might be of interest to you. Now, let's move on to staff exchanges. Again, what I would focus here is who applies. So these are consortium of universities. However, who are the target group? Any type of staff at any stage of their career who can be actually a recipient of MSCA staff exchange. So researchers, administrative managers, technicians, infrastructure operators, all of these could be a part of MSCA staff exchange. What we need to understand is there must be at least one organization from a non-associated third country. So there is a scope for your university, for example, Monash, to be a part of staff exchange, and then you can thus become a beneficiary of the staff exchange. The last part is co-fund. If you remember, when I discussed about the doctoral network, and I mentioned that when the doctoral network consortium get funded, they release vacancies for doctoral candidates. Under co-fund, these vacancies are not only related to doctoral candidates, but also for postdoctoral researchers. This is why co-fund is important for you. Again, all the postdoctoral vacancies are posted on Euraxis website. These have to be posted on Euraxis website. It's a requirement for all the projects to put it on Euraxis website. So you will have a lot of such vacancies there. Now, let's look at some important dates. The most relevant one for you would be the postdoctoral fellowship. And this is opening on the 12th of May and has a deadline of 14th of September. I have also included other dates and also the 23 dates if you have to start preparing for next year. Now let's look at MSCA participation in terms of Australia. So if you look at these numbers, this was under Horizon 2020, there were 235 researchers from Australia that were funded under MSCA, and I've given a breakdown of how they were funded under co-fund. IF was the previous postdoctoral fellowship termed as, ITN was the doctoral network that was termed as, and RISE was staff exchange that was termed as. So when you have some time, please have a look at it, just so that you have some interest. What are the top Australian participating organizations in terms of MSCA? I can see Monash is at number 5, and we expect it to climb further up with 14 number of participation. Generally, where do Europeans come to Australia from? These are more from Spain, Italy, Germany under MSCA Global Fellowship. Australians generally go to UK, Germany, Denmark, France, Netherlands. And what is Australian participation in terms of project distribution by scientific panel? Generally, it's more driven by engineering than environment and life sciences. Now, once we have done the MSCA part, we will now move on to European Research Council grant. So this is also something that is within the Horizon Europe funding mechanism. And it's quite a large bulk of Horizon Europe funding. So 17% of the entire Horizon Europe budget is allocated to ERC, and it accounts for around 16 billion euros. European Research Council grants are characterized by two things: high risk and high gain projects. So I've been talking quite a lot with researchers who have received ERC grant, and what they generally mention is if they were to submit a proposal that they submitted to ERC, they would be called mad by any other funding agency. So actually, ERC allows you to express yourself in terms of not being bothered much about what would be the risk factor. But if you have high risk, high gain sort of an idea, please, you have to consider ERC as your go-to funding. Of course, what you have to also look at in terms of figures is more than 12,000 projects have been funded since ERC's inception. And these have included 85 nationalities, and 35 EU and associated countries have hosted ERC projects. And this also include more than 150,000 publications, more than 1,300 prestigious prizes, including Nobel Prizes, and more than 80,000 researchers have been hired by ERC teams. Now, this one slide will give you a very wholesome idea about what ERC grant schemes are there and what would be applicable to you. So starting from the left, the starting grants are for those researchers who have completed their PhD in the last 2 to 7 years. If you are in that bracket, you are eligible to apply for starting grants. These are for up to 1.5 million euros for a period of 5 years. Then we move further up the continuum. It's a consolidated grant. If you are in the bracket of 72 years after completion of your PhD, you can apply for consolidated grants. Again, up to 2 million euros for 5 years period. The last individual researchers or PI-driven grant is advanced grant, which is for those researchers who have had significant track record of research achievement in the last 10 years, again, up to 2.5 million euros for 5 years period. Starting consolidated and advanced grant are for individual PIs. So as an individual researcher, you will apply to them. If you have had a starting consolidated or advanced grant, then only you are eligible for proof of concept. So I'll not discuss proof of concept. The last one is synergy grant. So these are for 2 to 4 PIs coming together and forming a sort of a team and applying for a synergy grant. One interesting thing that has happened since 2019 is that one PI can be based outside of Europe. So if you are a PI who wants to stay in Australia and still receive European funding, synergy grants are the way to move forward. There have been successful synergy grant recipients from Australia as well. So there is a track record of that. I have also tried to give you the success rate in terms of how it looks. I guess it's more or less similar to what the Australian grant success rates are. I'll give you also the indicative schedule of how the 2023 call calendars looks like. So the starting grants are going to open in July, consolidated are going to open in November, advanced grant will be opening in December, and synergy grant is also opening on July. What you need to understand is ERC does not consider nationality as a barrier. So a researcher of any nationality can avail European Research Council funding. However, what you need to understand is there is a minimum time commitment. What does that mean? So for a starting grant, you need to be spending 50% of your time on the ERC project. For consolidated, it's 40%, and for advanced, it's 30%. With that, also, I need to clarify that for starting consolidated and advanced grant, at least 50% of your time should be in a EU member state or associated country. This is not the case when it comes to synergy grant, because as you heard, synergy grant allows one PI to be outside of Europe. I'll just take you back to that particular image. So we organized the European Research Council grant webinar in September last year. We'll do that again this year, but if you are interested to have a look at it from a more detailed perspective from evaluators who actually do the evaluations. Please have a look at them. It's also on our YouTube channel. Then in terms of panel structure, there are 3 domains: life sciences, social sciences and humanities, and physical sciences and engineering. There are 27 panels. And when you are applying for an ERC grant, you generally should identify which panel you want to be evaluated under. However, if you are not sure, you can leave that empty and the ERC team will actually categorize you into one of the panels. Now, a very quick understanding of how ERC proposals are evaluated. So there is 2-step evaluation. The first step is a remote assessment by panel members. And here your CV and just the synopsis, which forms the part B1, is evaluated. Then the panel meets and then does the scoring. If your score is B or C, your proposal gets rejected and you receive a feedback as to why it was rejected. If you receive a score A, your proposal gets retained for step 2. And in step 2, this is where your entire proposal is being evaluated. Again, there is a panel meeting. Then you are requested for an interview in terms of starting, consolidated, and advanced grant. And finally, your rank is listed. And if you receive score A and B. Generally, I want to discuss this also because there is a lot of misconception that happens. Contrary to what you may think, ERC fronts frontier research, including applied research. One most often termed misconception is some of the panels are highly contested, so you should not choose them, which is not correct. So what happens is the budget is distributed among scientific panel as a function of demand, which means that if a panel receives larger number of proposals, automatically the panel will receive larger amount of funding. So it does not matter which panel is highly contested. You don't have to worry about that. The panel descriptors do not represent ERC scientific priorities. Publication record is not decisive in selection decisions. And lastly, the host institution is not an evaluation criteria. So it does not have to have a highly prestigious host institution. What matters is excellence, and excellence on part of the research project and excellence on part of the principal investigator. So on the project side, if it's groundbreaking in nature, what is the potential impact? What is your scientific approach? That is what is being evaluated. In terms of PI, your intellectual capacity, creativity, and commitment is evaluated. So excellence is the sole criteria, and it has to be mentioned out loud and clear that we do not look at the implementation or impact part, but excellence is the sole evaluation criteria. Some of the rumors that we hear about ERC is you can only apply for an ERC grant if you are a highly accomplished scientist, which is not true. It does not really matter if you have 10 to 12 years of your career as an accomplished scientist. If you are meeting that eligibility criteria, as you saw for starting, consolidated, advanced, or synergy grant, you can actually be rest assured that depending on how your proposal is or how your own CV looks at, you will be judged. In terms of successful candidate or interpretation that you need to continue on established research line, this is also not something that is generally true, because ERC does not require continuity as a source of credibility. Generally, the opposite is true. Even if you decide not to continue on established research line, that is still fine. The rumor 3 that we always hear is if you have already obtained an ERC grant, you are more or less likely to get another one, which is again not at all the case, because it does not really matter if you received, if you did not receive, because it's in isolation that is being judged. Definitely just on the excellence of your own proposal at the current phase. The last rumor that we generally hear is the more socially or medically relevant a grant proposal is, the higher the chances of it getting funded. Again, it's not something that is true. In terms of non-EU nationals receiving ERC funding, around 8% of ERC grant go to principal investigators outside of non-EU or associated country, and 60 total grants have come to Australian researchers. The most recent one for 2022, the results for 2021 calls came out in January and February. For starting, I believe there were 3 PIs from Australia, and for consolidated, there were 2 from Australia and 1 from New Zealand. So there are quite a number of good results coming off late in terms of that as well. just to give you an idea of trend, so there is an increase of non-EU nationals applying for both starting and consolidated. On advanced, you see a slight dip in 2020. It's because of the pandemic that this dip had occurred. Hopefully things will start getting back to the previous number. Now, let's look at something called an ERC implementing arrangement. So ERC has these implementing arrangements with funding agencies from different non-EU countries. So these arrangements help the nationally funded researchers to join ERC supported research team in Europe, and sometimes this could also be working remotely during their grant and enable the exchange of ideas and experience in cutting edge science. So currently ERC has implementing arrangements with NHMRC, which was signed in October of 2018, and with ARC in February of 2019. I have given you the procedure of how the implementing arrangement works, but when you get this presentation, maybe you'll be able to read this in more detail. The only thing that I want to mention here is the last ERC implementing arrangement call was in November of 2021. What's more interesting is if you look at the numbers that we see from ERC grantees expressing interest to host researchers funded by third country bodies. So European researchers wanting Australian NHMRC funded researchers, there were almost 668 expression of interest, and for ARC it was 705. So they want Australian researchers to come to their team for a certain period of time to exchange ideas. However, what's still not there is the actual visits happening. For ARC, there has been 2 such exchanges. For NHMRC, there is still no such exchanges, and we will have to work this out with ARC and NHMRC to try to see how we can actually improve on this number and what has not been working at the current time. Of course, the pandemic did not help much either. The last part of this particular segment is health topic with Australian co-funding. I know that as individual researcher, this might not be much of interest, but I think it's something that you should be aware. So under health topic, there is a co-funding mechanism between NHMRC and EU for collaborative research grants. So there is a certain number of calls that are identified. There were 8 for this year, and these actually closed for Horizon Europe on 21st of September. So for example, if as Monash University, some of the calls were of interest and they became part of the consortium and became eventually part of a successful consortium, even though Australia is not funded by European Union, the Australian government will fund around $5,000 for a period of 1 to 5 years. And these are for these 8 topics. The application opened on 3rd of February and closed on 2nd of March. It's just that you are aware that there is a co-funding mechanism on the health segment of Horizon Europe. Now, very quickly, I'll discuss about what Euraccess Australia and New Zealand does and what we are actually. So we are a pan-European initiative backed by the European Research Area, which means that the member states and the associated countries. It's an initiative of the European Commission. The idea is to support researchers' mobility, career development. The overarching aim is, of course, to enhance scientific collaboration between Europe and rest of the world. So anything that Euraccess does, because we are an initiative of the European Commission, these are all free of charge. And apart from everything we discussed, there are a few interesting things and some useful things that as a researcher you should be aware of. So Euraccess has 4 pillars. The first pillar is jobs and funding. If I'll take you back, you might remember that all the PhD vacancies or the postdoc vacancies have to be on Euraccess portal. So when I go back to Euraccess portal right now, if I'm looking at our portal, we have around 14,823 research job positions available and 294 funding opportunities. So of course, there is a wealth of jobs and funding related opportunities there. The second part is information and assistance. So if you're looking at for example, you want to go to Germany, you have a national portal for Germany, Euraccess Germany, where you can find country-specific information and which will allow practical advice on professional or daily life. Then we have 600 Euraccess support centers, which help researchers free of charge with services like helping you in your visa and accommodation and stuff like that. For example, if you are going to France and if you are choosing Paris, you can actually go to our website and select a Euraxis Service Center that is in Paris, and they will be able to help you on these visa and accommodation issues without any charge. The third part is partnering. So if you go to our website, there are currently 139,852 registered members and 20,543 registered organizations. How does this help? So if you are willing to have your CV there, if you want other organizations to have a look at your CV and approach you for being a part of your team, you can actually become a registered member on the Euraxis. And the same goes to, for example, Monash University. If Monash wants to be, I don't know if they are already a registered member. I know that there is a lot of Australian university on our platform, but if Monash wants, they can also be a part of registered organization or university. The last part is Euraxis worldwide. So there are currently 9 hubs across the globe: US and Canada, Latin America and Caribbean, Africa, India, China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and Australia and New Zealand. So we started our operations in January of 2020. And since then, we have been impressed quite a lot by the Australia and New Zealand research community. We have around 5,500 members. The membership is free. It means that you can actually just become a member, and there will be a lot of resources that will be at your tip. So what generally we do is we post 1 news per day on weekdays about either PhD opportunity, postdoc opportunity, or something that is of relevance from the European research landscape. We also provide flash notes, which are bi-weekly. So every 2 weeks, we send out flash notes and quarterly newsletters, and these come to your email addresses with all these opportunities and news from European research landscape. We organize quite a lot of webinars. And as I mentioned earlier, there are quite a few lined up. Of course, when you receive this slide, you can actually just click on these images and they will take you to the webinars. We organize quite a lot of missions. I guess we will have a webinar in June to Victoria, and hopefully I'll see some of you in Monash as well. Let's see how it goes. Then we, of course, organize flagship events. We organized the first ever European Research Day in Australia and New Zealand in 2020 and the Horizon Europe launch in 2021. So these are like really large events that we organize. Of course, we do quite a lot of interviews. So for example, successful Marie Sklodowska-Curie people trying to explain why you should be applying, how you should be applying. Of course, we also do quite a lot of work in terms of diplomacy. So we have a series called Coffee Chat with a Science Diplomat. Last but not the least, since all of you are watching this on your phone or laptop, I encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, also follow us on YouTube or on Facebook. We generally post just once a day so that you do not get information overload. With that, I think I'll stop my presentation and have given my email address. So if you feel you have questions which will not be answered today, feel free to write to me and I'll be more than happy to respond to your questions in writing as well. I think that is it from my side, Simonti.
Thanks, Nishant, for a very informative presentation. I will just open up to the audience directly now for questions. So is there any